You know, when I was scrolling through YouTube videos of Parasite Eve, most of them sort of implied that this game was or should have been or at least looked like a horror game like Resident Evil. But when you look closely, this game fails to be one, even though it's based on a horror novel, Parasite Eve. So in this video I will explain why it's not a horror game but a really good RPG in a form of normal review. Plus there aren't enough Parasite Eve videos on the net, so here's my part for the greater good. The premise of the game is simple. You play as Aya Brea, a rookie cop of New York Police Department who suddenly awakens to what you might call superpowers, but nothing magical or paranormal. I would call it science fiction-y since all of supernatural stuff is explained through science. Which does make sense when you think logically about it. It's a bit far-fetched, but hey, that's why people call this science fiction. With these powers, she fights the many horrors on her way to save the New York City, America, and probably the world too. If you don't have PlayStation 1, you can still play this game. Just download the latest version of one of the PSX emulators and you're set to go. But before that, check the settings if you want controller support. Then you have to change a couple of settings. Anything other than that should be personalizable. So mix and match. At least you'll see what works for you the best. For me personally, I wasn't able to change some of the visual and audio stutterings. Now that's out of the way, let's get on with the game. Visually, game looks good for 1998. This is my childhood. Yeah, it's pixelated or something, but come on, show me a game that was released in the same year and had better graphics. Maybe Resident Evil and Zelda look better. But come on, for the standards of that time, Parasite Eve's visuals are at least good. And for the record, most people bought games back in the day, often because of their gameplay. And the gameplay does decide in large part if it's fun. The handcrafted cutscenes are commendable, even though they changed main protagonist's looks almost in every cutscene. This was something I could not understand much. Sometimes Aya looks good and other times weird and borderline bad. This is some serious inconsistency, which does not happen to the main antagonist Eve, by the way. Pretty weird if you ask me. But in this one cutscene at the end of the game, Aya just looks too cute. And before you say it, yes, she was my first crush. Don't judge me. I was 8 or 9 years old, if not younger back then. Most bosses have unique and sinister designs, which are perfect for the game. The normal enemies are what you expect from an RPG game by the Squaresoft. Large and small snakes, giant rats and toads, humanoid doggies, and these flying fuckers. Pretty usual roster for an RPG. Music is typical RPG style one. There is one normal battle theme, which is a banger, and I still listen to it up to this day. Boss battle themes convey an intense aspect of the fight perfectly for that time, and is a banger too. Each explorable area has a theme, which creates a specific mood through set pieces. These tracks change from lighthearted to sinister and vice versa. The subway station theme is my favorite from them. I mean, just listen to this. It's a shame that this section is pretty short. The last boss battle theme, while being something I don't listen to much in my spare time, still creates this intense and pretty enjoyable atmosphere of the final confrontation. This is the end. It's either him, her, or you. I don't know, the gender of the last boss is pretty confusing. It sounds male, but should have been female, as far as I've understood. But it's a nitpick at this point. The sounds of guns or powers are acceptable at least. They don't sound too meaty or devastating, but still okay. The way the last power liberates sounds is just so satisfying. Something like this would not ruin my game for the most part. One pretty major turn-off could be the absence of the voices, except of grunts, and you can count each and every one of them on one finger. Most dialogues must be read, otherwise you won't understand anything. It's a game from 1998, what did you expect? Even Final Fantasy games had no voices, and sometimes even no grunts back then. So overall, presentation was good for its time. The big question is if it's aged well. The visuals and especially sound or music are relevant up to this day. It's fascinating how simple tracks can create a satisfying atmosphere. They just bring those pixelated stuff to life, I'd say. So perhaps visuals did not age well, but are at least good so that it does not disturb your playthrough. and the sounds just heighten the quality overall. Gameplay, although simple, can become challenging later on, especially on a second playthrough, for the secret or true ending. Let's get one really important thing out of the way. This isn't a survival horror. It may look like Resident Evil 1 or 2, which in my opinion is already debatable, but still Parasite Eve is not like those games. It's more of a Final Fantasy game than Resident Evil, Silent Hill, or Alone in the Dark. And the reasons are very simple. When the main protagonist has fucking superpowers, then there goes most of the horror out of the window. It may get creepy, which is mainly thanks to the music, but you'll have more than enough ammo and health kits to mow down every enemy on your way. Problematic for me were two special bosses of the secret ending and the final boss of it. Even after 10 years, I was able to clear this game without dying on the first playthrough. And I died 2 times in the Chrysler building because I was horsing around and trying different builds for my guns and armor. And the horror aspect of the game is kinda laughable sometimes, especially when people got disintegrated into blobs of flesh. This isn't scary nowadays anymore. Parasite Eve is one of those games that needs the same kind of remake as the Final Fantasy VII got. Maybe then Square Enix will be able to do horror stuff in it. And I can't imagine that this was a horror standard back then too. Or maybe the problem lies with me, since I've been watching and playing these kinds of games since my childhood, even though it wasn't advised for me back then. Did I get used to horror? Maybe I need a psychiatrist. Oh boy, here we go again. In conclusion, Parasite Eve is an RPG game with slight survival and horror aspect to it, which is mostly achieved through music in my opinion. Change my mind if you can. Now, for the actual gameplay stuff, just like any RPG game back in the day and nowadays too, you have normal attack and special commands, I guess. Special commands are called parasite powers, since they are generated by your parasitic mitochondria of your cells. You have this PE bar, which decides what you may cast. It is refilled gradually during battles. There are no items that can regenerate it manually, such as mana potions from other RPG games. The stronger a parasitic power is, the more energy it will consume. This constantly forces you to think strategically. If you use up all of the energy for one spell, such as Energy Shot, Liberate, or Barrier, then you won't have enough for the healing, haste, or cure. Plus, there are only 2 offensive powers, which I already mentioned, and both times after casting them you are stunned a bit, which could be a death sentence on a second playthrough, since most enemies and bosses will one-shot you if you're not careful. That is why I rarely use these powers. Haste and healing are far more useful and flexible, so to speak. Normal attack depends on the gun you are wielding. Some of them have different kind of rounds, but all of them use up the same kind of ammunition, except of the rocket launcher. Plus ammo for this bad boy is very limited. But if you play correctly, your late game handgun should deal more damage and be more versatile. The different kinds of rounds are simply elemental affinities: fire, acid, and ice. Most of the enemies are weak and strong against some of these. But in the end, the late game handgun should be more than enough to defeat every enemy, except of the squirrels, who may have some kind of a weakness, but they only spawn in a Chrysler building, so it's not worth to build for them. By the way, the rounds of your gun are decided through attachments that you put on your guns. Even though there are different types of guns, the damage they deal is calculated by the attack power. So a handgun can theoretically and practically deal more damage than an assault rifle, a shotgun, or an Uzi, and also shoot farther than any of the guns. I was able to acquire many handguns, assault, and automatic rifles, and I think there are only 5 or 4 shotguns in the game, and 3 rocket launchers. Most of them are located in a Chrysler building, which is an additional dungeon on a second playthrough. The differences between these types are as follows. Assault rifles tend to have more range than any other handgun, but take a while to aim. The same is true for the rocket launchers. Shotguns do have normal range and can deal AoE damage in a cone in front of you. The automatic guns have less power and range, but can be aimed faster and shoot more than 1 bullet per action. But the fact that some of the guns shoot more than 1 bullet per action does not make their damage higher. Rather, damage that they would have dealt with one bullet is split across every bullet proportionally. The only positive thing is the fact that most enemies can be staggered every time they are hit with a bullet, so effectively while you are shooting, your ATB gauge will be refilled. When you're finished shooting, so you repeat it and stun lock the enemy. This does not work on bosses, and every time you are shooting you are also susceptible to damage, which in most cases will be critical. So on a second playthrough, this strategy may and will kill you at some point. I personally prefer handguns, since they are pretty balanced, don't take much time to aim, plus their power can be raised as any other weapon as much as you want. So they can deal more damage than any other gun, and the range won't be a problem since more than 80 or 90 is just an overkill. Armor works the same way as in other games. The only difference is the critical evasion. I was able to achieve 100% evasion against critical strikes, but some enemies were still able to crit hit me. This was the moment I realized that strikes from behind and some of the hits from bosses would just crit no matter what. The critical evasion just works against naturally occurring critical hits, I guess. Every gun or an armor can have an attachment, such as extra health, inventory space, auto heal or cure, and so on. There are a lot of useful stuff here, and in order to beat the secret final boss, some of these attachments are necessary. Otherwise you'll die a lot. Personally speaking, these attachments are the one that lets you take multiple commands per action, and the one who raises your stats, such as HP, damage you deal, and the critical hit of those. Auto heal can be useful, but auto cure is a bit questionable. There is also one important attachment that you acquire, which lets you cast most of your powers with less parasite energy. The description of this is weird, but trust me, it gets the job done. Plus, you will be getting an armor with this attachment during the last section of the Chrysler building, before fighting the second special boss. Items are also what you would expect from an RPG game. The health potions with varying effectiveness, antidotes and revives. Outside battle, the tools to customize the equipment and key items. The actual combats function the same way as in Final Fantasy VII Remake. And by that I mean that you have ATB gauge, which fills automatically during fights, and when it's filled you can select one of the few commands, such as normal attack, special powers or usage of an item. You can move freely to and dodge enemy skills or normal attacks. The only difference from Final Fantasy VII's Remake is the fact that simple commands such as normal attacks, block or dodge can't be done without using up the ATB gauge, which in a late game will fill up very fast if you put a lot of points in it, plus within the handgun. Every time Aya levels up, she gets a couple of the bonus points, which can be used to increase the ATB gauge fill-in speed, the inventory space, or increase the power range or the clip size of any gun. This is very important if you want to defeat the secret final boss, and it gets a little funny when your handgun can have a clip size of 50, 60 or 70 if you really wanted to, plus a shotgun rounds. I mean, just imagine a handgun that has 70 rounds in it and they are shotgun rounds. I mean, that's fun. Most bosses have special attacks, which can be dodged by either moving around very fast through haste or standing in their blind spots. The secret final boss does not have one, so she will hit you eventually and often. And that's almost everything about gameplay. Let's get into the actual story and the playthrough, and disseminate everything. The story revolves around mitochondria. You know, those parts of our cells that create power. They are also known as powerhouses of our cells. The interesting part is that mitochondria have their own DNA, the similar kind as our cells' central parts, which decides how we would look, sound, and etc. It is implied that mitochondria weren't parts of our cells and only became after later development stages of our cells in order to survive. The cells give mitochondria oxygen and they in return the power to live. It's like a perfect symbiotic relationship. This much for the background. If you want to know more, there are countless infos on the net. This is really interesting, by the way. In this game's world, mitochondria is not only capable to generate general power for the cells, but also shoot fire, lasers, create a shockwave around the body, or through evolution create creatures like this, or this. Pretty hideous. And it gets worse in the sequel. If you want to avoid spoilers, go to here. In order for the mitochondria to do this stuff, it has to awaken and take over the cell's nucleus, which then gives it full control over one's body. The main protagonist, Aya Brea, for some reason which becomes known later, also has awakened mitochondria, but can still control her own body and use the said powers for her own benefit. The main villain, Eve, is complete opposite. Before she burned the whole opera, she lived somewhat normal life as Melissa Pierce. After the awakening of her mitochondria, she called herself Eve, the same first human female Eve from Africa. With this, it's implied that the genes of Eve were passed down throughout the whole mankind and was able to improve herself beyond humans. And in the year 1998, I think in game it's 2000, but that's irrelevant. She, as a mitochondria, no longer needed cells' oxygen. Rather, she would take over the nucleus, annihilate all other humans, and create sort of a better and stronger version of humanity, I guess. Keep in mind that mitochondria functions like a virus. When you get close to Eve, she just takes control over your mitochondria and can melt you in a blob of flesh and take all of your mitochondria with her in order to create this monstrosity. After hitting the new game, you'll be greeted by a cutscene which shows you the Christmas time in New York. Isn't that nice? Too bad the shit's about hit the fan. After this, you'll get a brief dialogue with the supposed date companion of Aya, where her name can be changed. Classical Squaresoft stuff back in the day. I personally leave everything as it is. Get into theater and watch the opera. Here you get the second cutscene. Everyone around you except you, your date, and a couple of people get burned. Aya, as a rookie cop, tries to stop the culprit and initiates the first boss battle, which also serves as a perfect tutorial. You know, I really like this intuitiveness of the old games. If you didn't know, on the PlayStation, X button is mostly always confirm or action. At least in the West, in Japan it's mostly circle button, which is weird, but a different topic for another day. So the player has this battle. What do you think he'll do? Of course he will try to move around and dodge the boss's attacks, which already teaches you an important lesson on how to dodge most of the damage from simple mobs and bosses. When the ATB gauge fills, the player will also hear a special sound, and here he will press X button, which prompts the player to aim and the last confirmation to shoot. After this command, Aya will also get her first power, healing. The battle ends abruptly when the boss Eve tells you some stuff and flees. Aya follows her and ends up on the backstage. This is a pretty good tutorial dungeon, where you'll meet the first mob, the Rat. This thing has two abilities, Fireball and the normal melee strike like Bite. If you get too close, the enemy will prompt to use Bite, and if you stay far, then shoot Fireball, which splits into 3 small balls. There are 2 ways to dodge this thing. Either sidestep all 3 of them completely, which becomes easy to do with the haste power that you'll get later, or stay in between these balls. Most enemies follow the same kind of a design, at least one ranged and melee attack, so that player has to select his own poison. Or if they don't have any ability that shots some kind of a orb at you, then they will just charge at you, you know, classic. Most of the time moving around in circle works for the majority of the game. When it does not work anymore, the player can use haste, which just enables the dodge of the most of the attacks against the late game bosses and the bosses in the Chrysler building. The haste is just too important not to use in almost every battle, and you're forced to use it since every enemy in that building can 1 or 2 shot you on later stages, if you're not careful. You might feel as if you're cheating when you use haste, but at that point it's either you or them. Plus, I could not find any other alternatives to that. In the first dungeon, you'll run around, open up some chests, interact with environment to find items, and get to the boss, who evolved into something like this. Before that, the game also teaches about hidden walls, doors, and rooms, which net you some useful goods. And if you are a collector like myself, then you'll start to wall hog everything from this point forward. This could become a bit irritating, since sometimes the player has to stay on a specific spot in order to trigger the animation. For example, here, I could not open this door with ease. even though I knew that I could and hugged the shit out of that closet. Aya moves well in normal speed, I guess, nothing major, but the movement outside the combat is just too weird, too robotic. I'm criticizing this because the movement, which should have been same, looks far better in combat. I'd say even natural to some extent. But then again, I'm trying to get blood out of the stone from a game out of 1998. The second boss fight is easy, nothing major. The only problem is that instead of one laser, she shoots now two and maintains them for longer. Not gonna lie, it's hard to dodge this move. But since it's the beginning of the game, they don't deal much damage. Plus you have the heal ability. Now it's time for the first sewer level. It's nothing major, only a couple backgrounds and a boss battle against the giant mutated crocodile, which became blind after mutating? It's kinda weird, but looks cool, so thumbs up. I still can't put my finger on an animal from which it mutated from. This is New York. I only heard about a myth of alligators who supposedly live underneath New York in the sewers and prey on humans that dare to disrupt their peace. But there were actually a couple of the sightings of these animals, especially the baby ones, who are still able to kill a grown-ass man if not careful. This is a pretty interesting story, which partially can be true. Now we know where Mark Zuckerberg came from. But back to the boss, who's not that hard to defeat. He's blind, so if you don't stand on his way, then he should not be able to hit you in a melee. Here the system promptly tells that there are two targets, the head and the tail. You have to kill both. Killing the head disables its laser breath attack and the tail for the shockwave strike, which can become a hassle to dodge if standing too close. But all in all, a cool boss battle. Later on, it is even possible to fight two of those at the same time, as a normal fight and as a far harder boss in a Chrysler building. After some exposition from a journalist and your partner Daniel hitting the second journalist, you'll get even more exposition and collect the infos about mitochondria. The key figure is Dr. Clamp, who for some reason does research from a museum of national history. I mean, that's pretty weird. Who does that? He tells the protagonist about the mitochondria, especially about Eve from Africa, the very first mitochondria apparently. When Aya tells him that the new murderer called himself Eve too, he goes silent and prompts you to leave, which is really sus. But what can I say? The story has to happen. The next Central Park section can be a bit of a hassle, especially when you have to go through the sort of a labyrinth part of it, but nothing major. Here spawn these monkey-like things with boomerangs, and for the love of God, I still don't know how to dodge those things. Sometimes I do it, and sometimes they hit for some reason. There are also ravens, these tortoise tentacle things, snakes, big and small ones, and the bears. The bears have the ability where they stomp on ground and release the lightning. That moves way too fast to dodge, but somehow you have to curve around it in order for it to make a circle around you. And the other enemy can be defeated easily from a certain distance. The tortoise things have a blind spot on the back, where they also have a weakness. The items here are nothing too important, so if you miss some of them, they won't ruin you. There are two bosses. The first one is this snaky thingy which splits itself in multiple heads in the beginning, but after dishing out some damage on it, it will merge in one big head and drop the biggest bombs. You're essentially playing whack-a-mole with guns and mutant snakes. It's a battle. The next one can be tricky if not careful. The battle happens on a carriage, and because of the space, Eve might get easy hits on you. The only attack of hers to watch out is when she flies up and drops a bomb. The player has to stay somewhere in the middle, and when the light dot appears, move as fast as possible on the other side of the carriage. Other than that, moving around in circles did the trick for me. Eve also tells Aya that they both are the same, that they should join forces and annihilate the humanity. I can understand why Aya would go into a depression or something like that, especially after the horrors she saw, which from today's perspective looks funny. rather than scary. Here Aya also meets, or better said is found by Kunihiko Maeda, a Japanese scientist who came to US to study mitochondria, since the same thing that is happening in New York already transpired in Japan. This is an important story part, which sets up the whole plot with Dr. Clamp and Eve. Oh yeah, he's the bad guy and the single-handedly responsible for the whole incident. Daniel also finds Aya after the carriage battle in Maeda's care. From here on, they set out as a group and try to find more infos about Eve and her mitochondria. So they go to the Clamp's lab in the museum, where they discover Aya's antibodies against Eve's mitochondria. As far as I've understood, every time mitochondria tries to take over Aya's cells, the mitochondria in Aya sort of shakes them off and covers the cells in a protective shield. Of course, Clamp comes back and sees them doing stuff and finds out about Aya's immunity, but in the end says that everything's too late. In the meantime, Eve assaults the police station and kills most of the officers. Your coworkers are okay, but the doggo gets mutated into a Cerberus, which is something most players would have anticipated from a mile. But nevertheless, you get a cool boss battle scene, which also shows you why the movement in this game is so important, and the haste is the best power you could have. Now, Police Station is a pretty straightforward dungeon. It has 3 floors and a basement. There is one hidden room, which is located in a locked room of the basement to the far north. You just have to move to the top right corner and hug the wall. If you're fortunate, Aya will go into a small room with some goodies. Nothing much, but still good to have. There is also a locked locker in a changing room. All the needed keys can be acquired from the dead bodies that Aya encounters. Sometimes they need to be investigated multiple times. There is also one pretty hidden cell room, which is located here on the 2nd floor. When you're ready, go to the top, defeat any enemy on the way, and face the Cerberus. As you might have anticipated, the boss has 3 targets, for left, right, and the center head. You can go for the center head to outright kill the doggo, but the left or the right head will heal all of the parts, so it's best to kill the healer first. The beam attack can be a hassle to dodge since the boss sometimes fires it too chaotically. One move that I can't 100% dodge up to this day is the howl, that every dog enemy also has. You know, I don't get it. Sometimes when I'm far away, it misses, but occasionally it doesn't. Sometimes I don't move when it's cast and it doesn't hit me, but sometimes it does. I mean, what? How should I find a blind spot for it? And it also applies slow, so that doggos will get up in your face really fast and bite you. These are the enemies that still irritate me sometimes, even up to this day. Other than that, kill the doggo, get a bonding between old pals, and get on with your business of chasing down Eve. Here starts the next day. In the lab of the police station, the gang finds out about Eve's true motivation. Well, it's more like Maeda tells everyone about the prior happening in Japan. Eve's main mission is to give birth to an ultimate being that would transcend A, the humans, and B, the current state of mitochondria. For that, she needs human semen. The important thing is for her to give mitochondria genes to her offspring, and if you forgot, mitochondria DNA is transmitted through females. For example, a normal DNA is a combination of a male's and a female's, but a newborn child gets its mitochondria genes from her or his mom. The father in this instance is irrelevant for the continuation of mitochondrial genome. That's why that first female in Africa is so important. The mitochondria in Aya and Eve currently are from that first female and have mutated into what they are now. As far as I've understood, if you gave some time, all the other human mitochondria would have evolved into something like Aya's, Eve's, or something else, which creates almost boundless potential for the story and where it could have taken us. Back to the story. The gang now needs to find a place where Eve could get a human semen, which happens to be located at the hospital in the neighborhood. So Aya and Maeda go there, they feel the heat, meaning that Eve is here. This place is a perfect example of a good use of a soundtrack, especially through transitions in atmosphere. When you barge in, you won't see anyone. The hospital is deserted, which already makes the atmosphere a bit tense, but nothing major. The absence of any kind of a music plays its own part too in all of this. The player constantly is awaiting some sort of a jump scare, which never happens and would never be possible to do in this sort of a game. This is also one of the reasons why Parasite Eve is not a horror game. There aren't even any enemy encounters up to a certain point. You go around, check every door in a typical RPG fashion, and come upon an open elevator door. The player naturally goes in to go to the highest floor, but since Eve is already here, she cuts off the elevator and Aya goes down. After exiting the elevator, you see a spark coming off from a fuse box and brings the light down. All the emergency lights are on and give a faint green color, and here finally starts a sinister music to play. It's the same one from the first day, but hey, it's perfect as a background music. The main objective is to find fuses and fix their box. A simple objective, but it forces you to check every room enemies do spawn, which also adds to attention. This isn't a safe place anymore. You gotta watch out for yourself. The fuses aren't hard to find if you explore every room. They are mostly these shiny objects. Sometimes you might think that they are unreachable, but in reality you just have to stand close to it and press confirm button. After fixing the box, the second elevator starts working again, and you can go back to the ground floor where in previously safe lobby you'll fight a couple of the enemies. The enemies for this section are mutated flies, rats, but the other kind? Wait a minute. Are those flame-throwing things hamsters? Interesting. And I don't know what the hell these things are. I always thought in my childhood that these blue things with red dots were mutated bacteria or something like that. These ball shooting things are for me incomprehensible. It's as if they are a combination of different creatures and organisms, but I don't know. I'm not a biologist. On the ground floor, the previously closed door in the lobby is now open. You get in and find 3 survivors, one of which gives you a card to open other doors. The main objective is to somehow destroy Sperm Bank and catch Eve at the highest floor. In the end, you do all this, fight a giant spider which you never defeat. It rather falls down and also does not die. From this section forward, you also have haste power, which is so useful in every battle against bosses or normal mobs. It even counters the paralysis from any enemy you meet in the future too. You just have to cast it after they immobilize you. You get a cutscene with fighter jets. Eve destroys them, by the way, and one of them will fall on you if you don't exit the scene fast enough, and gives you a game over screen. This is an occurring theme for the final boss and in the sequel too, which keeps you engaged and makes the main protagonist sort of vulnerable. Well, this was it apparently for this day. Now the gang knows that Eve now can have a child, or as they say, the ultimate being, and they need to find her and kill her. This is where the story goes a bit of a haywire and does not show you where to go clearly. The destination is Chinatown, which isn't that hard to find, but why do you even go there is never told. There is also an optional dungeon the player can complete in order to get the first rocket launcher. Is it worth though? Well, not really, since it needs a special ammo, the rockets, which there are only a handful in game, and can be missed easily. On top of that, as I've said before, if you've upgraded your guns constantly, the damage of the current gun, and especially those from the museum, should deal more damage in general. So in the end, the rocket launcher is a waste in my opinion. But back to the optional dungeon, the warehouse. If you go here after the hospital, the enemies will destroy you, even with haste, since you can't dodge everything. Sooner or later, some spider will hit you and chunk more than half of your health. The boss at the end isn't hard, since the sides of his are blind spots, and after killing its claws off, everything becomes a lot easier. Anyway, as I was saying, it isn't that clear why Aya goes into Chinatown and then to sewers. It makes sense after completing this section, since Eve wanted to escape via sewers. It's just weird to go to Chinatown directly without any hint from anyone or anything, and then to sewers underneath. 90% of sewers are copy-pasted, by the way. Nothing too special. There are items at the end of every tunnel. The only item worth getting no matter what is this armor, which gives extra HP but decreases the speed of the ATB gauge. But it's irrelevant, since you only need the HP bonus to give your best armor. After Aya does stuff in the sewers, she then goes to the railway station to fight this section's boss, which is this big caterpillar that splits into 4 after some damage. It just feels like that these 3 sections were jumbled together randomly. It's as if they had locations ready, bosses, the enemies, plus the best track in the whole game. Chinatown is 3 or 4 screens, 90% of servers is the same, even though it has much more screens, and the railway it's also 3 or 4 screens. And in the end, Aya goes outside. It's already dark and sees how the mass of mitochondria moves to the museum. If story went directly to the museum, nothing relevant would have been changed, especially when one of your colleagues before venturing to Chinatown tells you that Melissa Pierce often went to the same museum as mentioned above. I don't know, if I was a cop, I would have gone there directly. The devs wanted to use the assets so they combined everything, I guess. In the end, everything just puzzled me. But almost everything is redeemed by the next section, the museum. It's clear that a lot of time went to design this place and how it worked. This is the last dungeon after all, and when you meet Eve at the end, everything culminates in the last 2 battles. One against Eve and her 2 phases, and the other against the ultimate being with 4 phases, plus a chasing sequence where if he catches you, you die and have to redo the whole battle with 4 phases again. But I'm moving too fast. Let's discuss the museum a bit longer. This place can be like a maze. The moment you go in there, you'll notice Dr. Clamp going somewhere, and since everybody knows that he's a bad guy, you naturally follow and lose him. But in reality, he was waiting for you, so he somehow gets behind you and locks the damn door. From here on out, you just have to move forward, defeat any enemy you see. After battling your first enemy, the music starts to play, which tenses the atmosphere a bit. It's the same way as it was in a hospital or police station. This isn't a safe zone anymore. The enemies for now are roaches, small lizards and dinosaurs, the ground and the flying ones. Although the flyer is clearly a pterodactyl, I hope I pronounced that correctly, the ones that run around with their heads bobbling around look like some generic dinosaurs. These ground dinosaurs have the only attack that's hard to dodge without haste. The roaches will mostly use rolling strikes, often in quick succession, but still easy to dodge. The lizards jump around sporadically and will hit you occasionally, but they deal so little damage that because of my armor, they dealt 0 damage in the end. The pterodactyls have charging attack, easy to dodge, and ice breath horizontally or vertically, depending where you stand or moving. The enemies won't create any problem, especially with haste at your disposal, which you can cast at the beginning of every battle quite easily. As I've said before, the museum may look like a maze, but in reality you just have to move forward until you reach the security room on the highest floor in the center, disable emergency lockdown and open up every room in the museum. Before you go anywhere, go right from the panel that you use to disable the lockdown, and you'll find a secret passage which leads to an elevator for a hidden room, with shotgun and some items. Grab it, but don't do anything with it. We will need the spread attachment of it for a handgun that is available after you beat the boss of this section. On the way, you also meet Clamp in his room, where he explains everything in a typical villain fashion and then suicide bombs you by letting Eve use him as a walking bomb, which does nothing to you, but could have killed Maeda and Daniel. They survived this, so no worries. After unlocking everything, you should have a vague idea of places you haven't been to on the highest floor accessible, where you fight a mini-boss Triceratops. After winning the battle, he pushes you off the floor and you land where the remains of Tyrannosaurus Rex is held. If you've watched the opening of the game, then you will already know what comes next, a boss battle against it, which again isn't that hard with haste. By the way, grab the handgun from this room before or after the boss battle. This handgun is one of the best guns you'll ever get in a normal playthrough, for a couple of reasons, such as with it you can perform 2 actions consecutively, which is already OP, and it shoots single rounds. You can effectively do a lot more damage in a short period of time with this gun than any other gun available to you. Plus, your ATB meter does fill faster with a handgun, and if you've invested a lot of points in the speed of it, then you'll be taking action almost all of the time with the haste by your side. Strap some extra attachments on it, such as spread from the shotgun. Now that handgun shoots with the shotgun rounds. Congratulations, you can hit every enemy in front of you at the same time. Keep in mind, if you go on the highest floor from the stairs, you will effectively move towards the final bosses and won't be able to do anything else. If you haven't finished the warehouse section, then do it now. I forgot this on my first playthrough, so avoid it, since those are a couple of the level ups and items. After going upwards via stairs, you'll meet Eve, who's in her late stages of pregnancy. You fail to kill her and she escapes from you. The army tries to take her down but get demolished. This is where the army enlists your help against her. The main reason being the sudden combustion, and since Aya is immune to it, she can sneak in with a helicopter and fire a missile in her face. Sadly, this does not kill Eve, so you go up close and personal. This fight against Eve has two phases. The first one is pretty easy. You just shoot down multiple parts of her and defeat her. The only attacks to watch out for is the grab, since it does a lot of damage and can happen suddenly. Avoid her backside, since she can counter it by a spray attack, which even with haste is hard to dodge. The second phase is where things get interesting. She moves faster, has only one target to shoot at, and without haste she could effectively kill you in a couple of hits. And even with haste, some attacks are just undodgeable. I mean, just look at this. This is bullshit. Thankfully, you should have a lot of HP potions, and with two simultaneous actions, it's easy to heal yourself up. At this point in game, you should be able to out-heal her damage easily. Dish out the finishing blow, watch a cutscene where Aya sees Eve being dissolved into a liquid just like every other enemy and people she killed. The army picks Aya up on a ship afterwards. Everyone is celebrating, but as I've said before, if you watch the opening of this game, then you also should have noticed how the ships got blown up. That kind of sequence has to happen, plus your favorite gun modder and glorified storage box boarded the ship too, which is just an indication that the final battle hasn't happened yet, and game effectively tries to prepare you for it. This is your last chance to grab some items from the storage, enhance guns or armor and equip them. Save on a phone, since even if you beat the final boss on a first try, there is no guarantee that you'll escape him or her afterwards on the first try too. Trust me. When ready, go outside and face the ultimate being. A cutscene will play out where a child emerges from the blob of mitochondria, and with its first cries, it releases a burst of energy that destroys everything near it. Most people decide to evacuate, but not Aya. She remains and faces her nemesis. At first you might say, "Aw, come on, that's only a child." And you're right, a child that will bring the end of the world, if left alone. Plus, you saw how it blew two ships up, accidentally for the reference. The final boss has 3 phases, plus a 4th one, but if you can somehow get till then you've already won. First phase is nothing special, the only skill to watch out for is the one with an AoE around it, so if you shoot from a distance everything should be fine. Second phase is a hassle, since after damaging it a bit, it will split into 2, but if you've got shotgun rounds you should be able to hit them simultaneously. The ground target has a pretty hard dodge leap attack, plus a laser, which can actually kill you in a couple of hits. In the third phase, the boss reaches its maturity, so to speak, and finally achieves its true potential. There are 2 attacks to watch out for. The shooting balls one, which is almost impossible to dodge if you don't stand in its blind spot, which is behind the boss when it starts to shoot them. This is why it's important to stay in the middle, because the boss always jumps to one of the corners before shooting, giving you enough time to blindside him. The other attack is a 2-leap combo, which is impossible to dodge without haste, since the enemy just triggers it randomly and pretty fast. The moment you start hearing a shout-like voice, you have to get away from it as far as possible. Keep your health up and eventually you'll beat it. The 4th phase could have been a cutscene, since you just have to last for a couple of seconds, until Daniel throws a special ammo for the gun that Maeda made specifically for you. With it, the boss dies in a couple of hits, and that's it. This boss battle just shows how the final boss just evolves during the fight, and its 4th phase just symbolizes the fact that it just wanted to get a full immunity to all kinds of damage that you could apply to it. So that's pretty interesting way to end stuff, so to speak. The chase sequence may look easy, but for the first time it may be a bit hard, since the player does not know where to go and what to do. For the record, you want to blow up the ship and the final boss with it. How do you do it? It's simple, overload the engine and that's it. There is a map which shows you where the engine room is. Not that it's necessary, it's a fucking corridor. Once you get in the engine room, you just interact with the engine and Aya does the rest. In the meantime, the boss is getting closer, which is kinda nerve-wracking. I've completed this game many times and the chase sequence always brings me to the edge. After overloading the engine, Aya needs to get out. The exit door is sort of hidden. I mean, it's here. And if you don't go there, you're toast. GG to the whole fight again. But if you go through this door, then you'll come up on a deck where Aya jumps out of the ship and leaves the boss dying inside. Daniel and Maida find Aya and everyone lives happily ever after. Just joking, after this end scene, I'm not so sure about that. Some people may be left puzzled or confused by the end scene. But after you complete the Chrysler building dungeon, everything will become clear. But we'll get to that in a bit. By the way, the credit song is a banger. I still couldn't figure out what language is that. Portuguese? Anyway, after beating the game on normal, a new Game Plus will be available on the title screen. Hit it up to get the true ending. New Game Plus can be described as a hard mode. The enemies are stronger, hit hard and can kill you in a couple of hits. But there is the weird thing. Every gun and armor you've collected is carried over from the normal playthrough. So remember that perfect gun you've crafted at the end? Yeah, you get to have it from the beginning, which lets you one-shot every enemy early on. But we're here not for the normal campaign. Once you get the access to the world map, you'll notice a new location, the Chrysler building. This place is a maze, and if you're not prepared, your enjoyment will go down rapidly. The building has 70 floors. This fact is close to a reality since it's based off of a real place in New York with 68 floors. The first floor is the entrance and can be cleared directly. Some of the floors before boss battles are also straightforward and aren't like mazes. But still leave the impression of it if you don't have a guide or making a map yourself. By the way, it's really easy to make your own map. Take a small paper and write an arrow going downwards, signalizing the entrance point. Each floor has one warehouse room with a lot of items and equipment, especially in the beginning. These rooms can be marked with some special marker. For me it was a simple dot and are always placed horizontally. The same is true for the elevators. I mark them with a small square sign. The arrow going upwards will be a path going to the next floor. Simple lines in any direction will be signs for pathways. In the end, the map should look like this. Pretty simple. I did the first 30 floors without a map and boy was it boring as fuck, especially because of the fact that most enemies died in one hit. The only strong enemy is the chest monster, which at this point in game can kill you in one hit. These enemies are important because sometimes they drop revives. At first I thought that there was one warehouse per floor, but on the 26th and 25th I found two of them. From this point forward I started making the maps of every floor and suddenly clearing this dungeon became pretty fun. I was somewhat excited to explore every floor and find all the goodies. By the way, there are for some reason two warehouse rooms only on 26th or 25th floor. But before starting the exploration, you'll need two really important powers. The first one, you might have already guessed, is the haste, and second one, barrier, which you'll get during the second dungeon of Central Park. The haste will become available during hospital section, so I'd advise to start the exploration of the Chrysler building after or during hospital section. The main reason being the first boss you'll encounter, which is a reskin of the spider boss, but this time you don't have much space to maneuver around him. Without haste, even the first boss will kill you with one hit. Barrier is needed to counter the chest monsters if you have the initiative attachment on your gun. This is important in the beginning, since approximately till floor 40 Aya won't have much HP to tank the first strike from the chest monsters. It will always have this first strike and will crit in most cases, which one-shots the player overall. After hospital section, you normally don't need to do anything in the original story and focus completely on Chrysler building. But if you have short health potions, then a revision of the main story is a good idea. Every time Aya levels up in a Chrysler building, dude, why is it such a tongue twister for me? She will get a lot more bonus points than during the main storyline, and it's like 2000 points more. You will be able to max out your inventory space and ATB refill speed in no time. Every 10th floor has a boss. Visually they aren't anything special, just reskins and with more power. Even though the first 20 to 30 floors have pretty weak enemies, the bosses can still one-shot if you're not careful enough. There are only 2 unique bosses, one on the 15th floor and the other on the 17th floor, before the final boss. And when I think about it, the Chrysler building in this universe has more than 70 floors, since after the 17th floor there are around 3 or 4 more floors. The first special boss is a giant roach that moves really fast. Without haste, most of its attacks won't be dodged, but they aren't anything special. If you move around a lot after every shot, then you'll avoid most of them. The special mechanic here is its reproduction. When the boss's HP gets less than 50%, approximately, it will take off and start flying, but it will leave a small egg that hatches the exact copy of the boss on the ground. The flying boss now flies pretty slow and shoots at you, while the newly hatched one grows up and becomes fully mature in a couple of minutes. If you don't kill the little one before it matures and takes off, the cycle will repeat itself and you'll have a flying one and the little one on the ground. Here is the shotgun spread attachment really useful, since you can just deal damage to both bosses at the same time, and after killing the flyer, you can focus on a small one and kill it before it takes off. The first time around I wasn't able to prevent it from taking off, but the second time I was able to kill the flying one really fast and focused on the little one, which matured, and I was able to kill it right at the moment of it taking off. This was a really cool boss battle, a bit challenging and intense, but I enjoyed it a lot. The second unique boss is on the 17th floor, which is a giant queen bee, and this boss was a lot harder, mostly because of its undodgeable attack and constant mob spawning. If you don't kill them fast enough, they will restore the health of their queen, which is bad. But her undodgeable attack makes everything far worse, since every time she does this, time does not stop. Every enemy moves in your direction, can make a circle around Aya and damage her immediately. And by the way, those mobs can also heal their queen too. When the boss releases her from her stasis, so to speak, on top of that she also applies a status element that reduces the speed of the parasitic energy recharge. Because of this, sometime later you won't be able to apply haste on yourself, which is like a death sentence at this point in game. During previous roach boss, you might have been able to beat it without shotgun rounds, but here it's necessary. I mean, look at this. There are 2 mobs already present and the third one is already on its way. This boss will test your patience. Keep also in mind that there aren't any save points before these bosses, so if you die, good luck going through previous 10 floors again. I almost started sweating when I got low on my health potions. After beating her, all of the subsequent floors are just straight ways leading to the secret final boss. The secret final boss is your sister Maya, or better said, your sister, who was somehow saved by the mitochondria and continued to evolve in this building during the whole story. This was a sort of a plan B for the mitochondria in case Eve's demise. You get more story bits, where Aya talks to her sister Maya, but afterwards you start fighting the mitochondria controlling her. Now this boss has a similar mechanic as the roach boss. When you chip away a portion of her health, she will summon a visage of Maya and restore her health. She can summon 2 of them at the same time. The second one will either immobilize or cast a barrier on the boss. This kind of looks pretty stupid. I mean, what's the deal with summoning the visage of Maya? You know, it's just weird. But hey, I'm not one to judge, I guess. The immobilize can't be dodged, so you have to cast haste on yourself afterwards if you want to move again. The portion of the health she restores starts on a low amount of 1000 points, but raises up to 20,000 or more. But the amount she restores starts to decrease shortly afterwards, so practically you might be able to outlast her if you don't take too much damage and have a lot of health potions. But generally she can be killed before she heals herself too, but that depends on luck, to be honest, since she could also use immobilize and barrier, which does not restore her health. If you're able to deal a lot of damage in a short amount of time, then you might be able to kill her before she restores 10,000 health or more. After defeating her happens a very interesting thing. The enemy mitochondria tries and succeeds in taking control over Aya. Before this, her mitochondria created an immunity against other mitochondria of Eve, but this one is more powerful and more similar to Aya's body than Eve's was, I guess. That is why it was easy for her. But Maya comes to the rescue and frees Aya from mitochondria's control. This clears up everything with the normal ending. where Aya's and everybody's eyes turn red. That ending symbolizes the fact that even though the plan A of mitochondria failed because Eve was defeated with the ultimate being, the plan B succeeded and mitochondria took over the world. Through Aya and Maya, supposedly. Aya saves the world and everybody lives happily ever after. Is the story good? Yeah. It has a couple hiccups, such as the fact that Aya could see Maya's visage throughout the story. It is sort of explained because Aya has a part of Maya implanted in her eye. This does not convince me. The other problem is the lack of connection between Chinatown sewers and metro sections to the actual story. As I've said before, you could remove these 3 locations, go straight to the museum, and nothing much would change in the story. A reason for these sections is not established much. You want to convince me that Aya just stumbled upon the entrance to the sewers with mitochondria trails on top of it? Do you even know how big the Manhattan part of the New York is? For 1 or 2 or 3 people to search for something that small? Overall, even though graphics didn't age well, the gameplay and story is pretty good. The combat system is predecessor to the later Final Fantasy games, for example, where you just move around while entering commands and finally culminates in a gameplay of a Final Fantasy VII remake. It's a bit surprising that Square Enix hasn't brought out this kind of system earlier, but it's better late than ever. Parasite Eve is an easy recommendation for every RPG lover. Plus, it takes only around 6 to 8 hours at best to complete the game for the first time.